Hello, I am Yoshiki Ano from Tokyo, Japan. I will talk about the Chinese military strategy today. First of all, I'd like to talk about until when will China be formidable and what should we do? The average duration of the most powerful and prosperous period of the dynasties is about 50 years, according to the Chinese history. The pressure on the surrounding countries caused by the growing China would be kept for more than 10 to 20 years because the economic growth began in the late 1970s under Deng Xiaoping's leadership. After 2030, China will become a society occupied by more than 200 million aged people, and the population of China will begin to decrease. China will surely lose the momentum of the economic growth and the military expansion. According to the lessons from the Chinese history, the PRC will be suffering from the civil war or the revolutions after 2030. The most important issue on the national security of the neighboring countries should be how to endure the increasing pressure of the Chinese military challenge until 2030. Next, I'll talk about Mao's strategy. Active defense strategy. The rise and fall of the dynasties on the continent of China brought the Chinese philosophers some unique view on the history. They considered the human history as the cyclic changes in the mixture of the positive aspect of all events within the universe, yang, and the negative one, yin. The Chinese people would never give up in the worst situation because they believe yang will surely come back again in some day. They would always be cautious, not becoming arrogant about the height of the best situation, because yin has certainly already stolen up behind them. Such a view on the history based upon the dualism has prevailed among all fractions of the Chinese philosophers, including the most famous ancient military strategist, Sun Tzu. Mao Zedong was also influenced by his view in his strategy. Mao viewed a war as the highest form of struggle for resolving contradictions when they have developed a certain stage. He also said that a war is the continuation of policies by other means. When politics develops to a certain stage beyond which it cannot proceed by the usual means, war breaks out to sweep the obstacles from the way. He asserted that the seizure of power by armed forces the settlement of the issue by war is the central task and the highest form of revolution, and only with guns can the whole world be transformed. Mao seemed the military force as the only decisive means to resolve the political contradictions between the imperialism states. However, he also put the great importance on the politics and other non-military factors. This shows that dualism. The PRC leaders and the strategists emphasize the importance called Santen, including psychological warfare, propaganda campaign to the masses, and the legal warfare. Those are very effective to collapse the adversary mental strength. At the other side of the dualism, Mao formalized the active defense strategy. The strategy contains 3 stages. The first stage is our strategic defensive. The second one is our preparation for the offensive confronting the enemy's defensive posture. And the final one is our strategic offensive and enemy strategic withdrawal. On the defensive stage, Mao asserted, we sometimes have to retreat to avoid our casualties caused by waging war with the overwhelming enemy. If possible, we should disturb the enemy in order to wear down the enemy's strength. The preparation stage is the hardest period for China during the long protracted war. During this stage, we should alter the balance of power by wearing down the enemy enough to launch the offensive with the advantageous power. On the offensive stage, we should pursue the annihilation of the enemy. The active defense strategy is ineffective under the modernized local conflicts, such as those concerning the sovereignty of the disputed territories. This strategy, adapting to the conflicts over the sovereignty of the territories, puts more emphasis on the offensive than the Mao's active defense strategy for the reunification of the mainland China. The People's Liberation Army (PLA) would not give up their assertion to the sovereignty to the disputed territories, including Senkaku Island, Diaoyu in Chinese islands. Senkaku Islands were incorporated into Japan's territory according to the international law with the legal procedures in 1895 by the Japanese government. At that time, Qing dynasty did not declare any protest to the incorporation. The PRC abruptly began to assert their sovereignty to Senkaku Islands in 1971, only after the discovery of the submarine oil field by ECAFE, Economic Commission for Asia and the Far East, in 1968. The similar situation has already observed in the South China Sea. The PRC is disputing their islands with Vietnam and the Philippines. Both wage the battle and other neighboring countries. The PRC would not give up their illegal request for the sovereignty to the islands, and if the balance of power is seemed to become overwhelming to the adversary, they will not hesitate to occupy the disputed area with their force by surprise. Once succeeding in the occupation, they would by no means bring back the territory. This shows the inherent endurance of the Chinese leaders to accomplish their aim in the long run, and their will to use force to do it without any hesitation if there is an opportunity. Nuclear forces combined with people's war. Another principle of Mao's strategy is Lian Dan Yi Xin. This means the ballistic missile with the nuclear warheads and the artificial satellites. Peng Dehuai, commander of the Chinese volunteer force dispatched to Korea during the Korean War, opposed to Mao's People's War concept because of the severe experience of waging war with the modernized U.S. forces. Peng asserted the need to modernize the PLA conventional forces by learning from the Soviet forces. On the other hand, Peng would accept the experienced nuclear deterrence of the Soviet Union. However, Mao rejected the Peng's request for the modernization. Mao, as the leader of the newly built the PRC, would not accept the reliance of the nuclear deterrence on the Soviet forces. Mao decided to develop the nuclear bombs and the ballistic missiles under the support of the Soviets. All supports provided by the Soviet side were withdrawn as the result of the confrontation between the PRC and the Soviet Union in 1960. In spite of it, the PRC independently succeeded to develop the nuclear bombs and the various kinds of the ballistic missiles by the early 80s. Mao established the foundation of the sovereignty and the independence of the PRC from the US and Russia by attaining her own nuclear deterrence power. On the other hand, Mao would defend China from the invasion, especially by the Soviet army along the long border with the Soviet Union by the People's War Strategy. On People's War Strategy, Mao said, "What is the true bastion of iron? It is the masses, the millions upon millions of people who genuinely and sincerely support the revolution. And he also said, the operation of the people's guerrillas and those of the main forces of the Red Army complement each other like a man's right and left arm. However, people's war strategy should impose the burden of the guerrilla warfare and the casualties on the civilians, and besides, the enemy should be allowed the invasion in the depth of the Chinese territory to wear down their strength. People's war strategy has a great influence on the PLA military strategy today. For example, the Chinese strategists now consider the information warfare as a new type of people's war, and they put the emphasis on the modernization of the cyber militias from the IT specialists in the civilian sectors. They also assert that information warfare is not only a war using the computers, but also a new special war mobilizing radio communication and internet technology. The PLA strategists put the emphasis on the creation and the development of people's war theory under the current national defense circumstances in order to match the request for war with the advanced technology. To accomplish the ideal and perfect mobilization system and the intimate cooperation between the PLA and the civilian sectors is indispensable. China is also emphasizing integration of defense and civilian sectors to leverage output from China's expanding science and technology base. This reflects the traditional total mobilization system of people's war strategy. Another example of people's war strategy is Xiaotentan, which means war without any limitations. This strategy is based on the idea that every usual measures in the civilized society should be utilized as weapons. This concludes today's session. Thank you.